Okay, we're here on RealAgriculture.com with the beef market update with Ann Dunford. Welcome, Ann.
Thanks, Sean.
Okay, Ann, fat cattle market. We're getting close to the end of August. What's happening?
Well, I wish I could report some better news, changing news. It does feel like both markets in the U.S. and Canada have made a bottom, if you will, a summer low, and we're trying to grind higher off of that, but it feels like it's going to be a slow process. We will trade cattle here in Alberta this week in the low 80s, it looks like, net at the yard. And in the U.S., they did gain a buck last week to 82, feeling as they still should get 83, but that trade probably doesn't happen until Friday. So it's bottoms in, my opinion, bottoms in, grind the market higher from here, but it's not a ricochet out of the bottom.
Okay, we're starting to see grass cattle come to the market. What's the story there?
Yeah, well, and again, this is some years, of course, we got a very early run if prices have been strong or areas have been very dry. And this year it's been a very subdued, kind of delayed. And maybe part of the reason is we had a stretched out run, areas that were droughted out early, had some cattle forced off grass early this year. And so as a result, it's kind of been slow getting into the real kicker, but numbers are picking up fairly substantially now, and that will be the case over the next 3-4 weeks. We'll have some big runs of grass cattle. Amazingly solid pricing. The market kind of started in one spot and has pretty much stayed, within 2 or 3 pennies of that all the way through the last few weeks. And again, given the lows that we're seeing on this fat cattle markets, it's always surprising. But again, we've seen time and time again where these cattle do finish in the winter time frame. That's a market that on the futures market is premium in its nature and its structure. So that's what these guys are buying on. They're not buying on today's fat cattle market. They're looking ahead in the futures market and saying, well, the futures is this much higher, and so therefore I will step out and pay more for these grass cattle than makes sense on today's market. So if you're just looking at the numbers today, it seems pretty crazy, but that's what we do time and time again with these grass cattle.
So is that the case on both sides of the border?
Yes, although right now we don't have much U.S. interest on these grass cattle here in Western Canada, whereas this time last year we did. If you remember, we had the dollar was such that we saw quite a few grass cattle making their way into the U.S. last year. Not the case this year. The other thing that's hovering over that whole U.S. buy is still this cool issue. That to put Canadian cattle into a U.S. feedlot and then market them into a U.S. packing plant, there's a set discount on those cattle. So and that's more of a known today than it was a year ago. So today it's just, well, we know it's going to be this much back, and so therefore they got to be pretty cheap in Canada before they can step up here and buy them.
So in terms of where the feedlot capacities are right now, where kind of is that lying?
Well, and I think that's one of the drivers behind this feeder market today. Everybody says, oh, wow, this thing's crazy as far as what the fat market's doing. Of course, if you're selling feeder cattle, you're maybe not agreeing with that statement. But that's one of the drivers. We've got a lot of empty pens in southern Alberta. And that's normally on August 1, you'd get down to around a 60% capacity ratio. And this year the estimate was probably under 50%. So there's no question that's going to be a driver. For whatever reason, some of these hotel spaces have to get filled up.
Okay, so we're getting closer to Labor Day. Consumer demand, barbecue season's coming close to an end here. How is that shaping up?
It's interesting, Sean. Usually what our best grilling season is actually early. It's actually that May-June period. Once you get into the heat of summer, and I know we haven't had it here in Western Canada, but in areas in the U.S. where the population bases are, there's some hot periods, and actually those turn more into the hamburger hot dog kind of market. So our best demand from a grilling perspective is usually early on, May, June. Then it slows down, gets pretty quiet. We've talked about the doldrums on the beef demand side. Actually, on the flip side, once you flip the calendar into September, the kids go back to school, starts to cool off a little bit, you actually get a little bit of often an increase in demand for beef products. People are willing to turn the oven back on again and those kinds of things. So we are sure going to be hoping for a little bit of an improvement there, although I think we got to be really honest with ourselves. We've got a lot of pork in North America. Exports, of course, have been impacted because of H1N1. We've got a lot more pork in North America that doesn't have a place to go, and so that's going to be over our shoulders for some time, even with these hog buyout programs and reductions that we're hearing about across the board. These things take time, they will work, but in the short run, we still got lots of meat in the North American marketplace.
We've got in Canada here, we have a report coming out tomorrow. What should come from that?
Well, tomorrow will be the StatsCan inventory report, mid-year, July 1 inventory report. I don't think there should be any surprises. We're going to see smaller numbers. We saw, of course, cows continue to come to town earlier this year through those drought areas especially. And so right now, to me, it looks like numbers should continue to be down pretty much across the board, maybe more so in Alberta than other areas just because of the drought impact in earlier this year. And then secondly, we're going to be looking at a smaller calf crop as we go into 2010. I mean, 1 + 1 = 2. So less cows, smaller calf crop. Overall, we're looking at smaller supplies ahead.
Okay, thanks a lot, Ann.
Okay, great, Sean.
For more information on Gateway Livestock Exchange or Ann Dunford, go to gatewaylivestockexchange.com.